What's going on, guys? I'm Daniel West from the West Media. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be discussing the exposure triangle. Today we're going to be discussing the exposure triangle. So the exposure triangle, what is it? ISO, aperture and shutter speed. These are three components that make up the exposure triangle. Number one, shutter speed. Shutter speed determines the length of time that light is allowed to come into your camera and hit your sensor. The longer you have your shutter open for, the longer you're allowing light to come into your camera and hit your sensor, giving you a brighter image. The faster you have your shutter open for, the less light is going to allow to come into your camera and hit your sensor, giving you a darker image. Artistically, shutter speed works in a different way. The faster you have your shutter speed, the more motion you're going to freeze, meaning there's going to be less motion blur. The longer you have your shutter open for, the more time you're allowing for light to move, giving you more motion blur. Number two, aperture. I look at aperture like the pupil of our eye. They work in similar ways. When we walk into a dark room, our pupil, it opens up to allow more light into our eye so we can see better in the dark. And vice versa, if you walk into a very bright scenario, you'll notice your pupil, it closes up to stop light from coming in, to bring down the brightness essentially. And it works exactly the same in our cameras or our lenses. The wider you have your aperture, the more light you're allowing to come into the camera and hit your sensor, giving you a brighter image. The smaller you have your aperture, let's say f8 or f12, the less light you're allowing to come in to hit your sensor, giving you a darker image. And artistically, it works in a different way again. The wider you have your aperture, the shallower the depth of field, meaning your subject's going to be in focus, it's going to throw more of the background and the foreground out of focus. But on the other hand, the smaller you have your aperture, let's say f8, f12, it's going to give you a greater depth of field, meaning more of the background and more of the foreground is going to be in focus. You see this a lot in architecture and landscape photography. Number three, ISO. ISO is different to aperture and shutter speed in the sense that it doesn't actually control physical light coming into your camera. What it does do though is taking the available light that's hitting your sensor and boosting the signal, giving you a brighter image. So it's digitally brightening your image. It's not actually letting in any more or any less light, which is great. It allows us to walk into dark scenarios where there's very little light, bump up our ISO and get a correct exposure or exposed how I'd like it to be. And obviously that sounds great, but there's a catch. The higher you have your ISO, the more noise and the more grain you're gonna see in your image. Now this varies from camera to camera. A lot of newer cameras these days, especially the full frame ones, they're really good at pushing the ISO really high without any loss of quality. I know the Sony A7S II is a low light beast. You can really bump the ISO up with very little noise, very little grain, and retaining a lot of the quality in the image. A lot of the crop sensor cameras these days, they're even quite good. But a rule of thumb is to try and keep your ISO as low as possible. That way you're not gonna run into any kind of noise or any grain. So that's it, guys. Just a quick rundown of aperture, ISO and shutter speed, the exposure triangle. Thank you for tuning in. I haven't got much time. I know my girlfriend's gonna be back soon, the kids are asleep, so yeah, I'm gonna lose my time. But thank you for tuning in. Please like and subscribe. That way you'll be able to see any new videos that pop up and you won't miss out on anything. Thank you for joining me. I'm Daniel West. I'm out. Bless.